Johnny!
What if I told you the most terrifying horror story ever written wasn't fiction? What if Stephen King, the undisputed master of fear, didn't actually invent the Overlook Hotel? What if it found him? Tonight, we're going somewhere most people are too afraid to go. Not into the pages of a novel, not into a movie. We're going into the real building, the real rooms, the real history, the real darkness. Because here's the truth that keeps horror fans up at night. The Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, is still standing, still open, and still very, very haunted. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you're not going to be sleeping with the lights off. It was October 1974. A young, broke, struggling writer named Stephen King had just published his first novel, Carrie, and was still trying to figure out if he actually had a future in this business. He and his wife, Tabitha, needed a break. They were exhausted, burnt out. So they did what any couple would do. They got in the car and drove. They drove west, through the flat plains, up into the mountains of Colorado, higher and higher, winding roads hugging the edge of the Rockies, until they came around a curve, and there it was. A grand old hotel perched at the edge of the wilderness. Enormous windows, Georgian colonial architecture, a sprawling building that looked like it had been dropped onto the Colorado landscape by something that wanted it to be found. This was the Stanley Hotel. And here's the detail that rewrites history. They arrived on the last night of the season. The hotel was shutting down for winter the very next morning. The heating would be cut. The staff were packing up. The kitchens were closing. Stephen and Tabitha King were offered a room, not out of hospitality, but almost as if out of inevitability. They were given room 217, and they were, for all practical purposes, completely alone in a hotel with hundreds of rooms, miles of corridors, and 100 years of history pressing down on every wall. Think about that. Not a quiet hotel, not a half-empty hotel, an empty hotel. An entire massive building, the dining room set and silent, the ballroom frozen in mid-preparation, the lights on corridors that led nowhere but to more empty rooms, and one couple alone inside it. That night, a fierce wind came down off the mountains and hit the Stanley like a living thing. The windows rattled, the pipes groaned. Somewhere in the depths of the building, a door opened and closed on its own, and Stephen King had a nightmare. In the dream, his young son, Danny, was running, not playing, not laughing, running in terror. Down a long, empty hotel corridor, screaming, and behind him, chasing him, gaining on him, was a fire hose, animated, possessed, alive, coiling through the hallway like a snake, hunting his child. Stephen woke up drenched in sweat. He sat on the edge of the bed in room 217 of the Stanley Hotel, in the dark, in the silence, in the wind, and he thought, I have my next book. He grabbed a notepad, he started writing, and by the time the sun came up over the Rockies, the bones of The Shining were already on the page. But here's what most people don't know. King didn't just have a dream. The hotel gave him the dream. Because the Stanley Hotel had been haunted, officially, repeatedly, and verifiably, for decades before he ever checked in. Room 217 was already infamous, and the story of what happened in that room is every bit as disturbing as anything King ever put on paper.
Let's go back further, way back to 1911. The Stanley Hotel was only 2 years old, still gleaming and new, when a powerful storm swept through Estes Park. The kind of storm that sends animals hiding and people indoors. The kind of storm that knocks out power and turns the world dark. And on that night, Elizabeth Wilson, the hotel's chief housekeeper, made her rounds. Now, in 1911, the Stanley was still lit with acetylene gas lanterns, beautiful but volatile. Elizabeth's job was to go room by room and light them. She made her way to room 217. She opened the door. She walked inside. She reached for the lantern. There was a gas leak she didn't know about. The spark from the lantern ignited it. The explosion was catastrophic. It blew Elizabeth Wilson through the floor, crashing down into the dining room, 1 full story below, in a hail of plaster, wood, and fire. Miraculously, somehow, against all logic, she survived. Broken ankles, severe burns, but alive. She healed, she recovered, and she returned to the Stanley Hotel and never left again. She worked there for the rest of her life, and according to everyone who has slept in room 217 since her death, she is still working. Guests report waking up to find their clothes unpacked and neatly folded when they had left their suitcases by the door. Items moved to more appropriate locations. Lights turned off when left on. Lights turned on when guests are sleeping. Some guests wake to feel the covers being tucked in around them, a gentle but unmistakably firm pressure around the edges of the bed when they are completely alone in the room. One guest, a man traveling alone, reported waking at 3 a.m. to the feeling of someone sitting at the edge of his bed. When he turned on the lamp, no one there, but the indentation in the mattress remained. Elizabeth Wilson, it seems, still takes her job seriously. And there is something uniquely terrifying about a ghost who isn't angry, who isn't malevolent, who is simply present, tidying, watching, caring for the room she died protecting. Because you cannot reason with devotion that powerful. You cannot escape a spirit that simply believes it's doing its job. Stephen King absorbed all of this, the woman in the room, the dedication, the haunted domestic energy. He took it and poured it into the most disturbing scene in The Shining, the woman in the bathtub of room 237, beckoning, beautiful at first, then not. Inspiration has never been darker.
But Elizabeth Wilson isn't the only one who stayed. The man who built the Stanley Hotel, Freeland Oscar Stanley, is also still there. F.O. Stanley was one of the great American inventors of the early 20th century. He and his twin brother, Francis, co-invented the Stanley Steamer, one of the first automobiles ever built, a steam-powered car that was,
for a brief and remarkable period, faster than any gasoline engine in the world. He was brilliant, driven, and deeply ill. When Stanley was diagnosed with tuberculosis in 1903, his doctors gave him months to live. So he went to Colorado, to the clean mountain air, and something happened. He recovered. He recovered completely. And in gratitude to the place that saved his life, he built it a monument. He spent years constructing the grand hotel that stands to this day. He poured his genius and his fortune and his soul into it. F.O. Stanley lived to 91 years old, and if the stories are to be believed, he never really left. Staff and guests regularly report seeing a tall, shadowy figure in the lobby, standing near the front desk as if reviewing the guest register, moving through the billiards room, his favorite spot during life, sometimes just standing in the corner of a room, watching as if taking stock. He's not threatening, he's not violent, he simply cannot leave the thing he built. And his wife, Flora Stanley, is right there with him. Flora was a gifted pianist. During the hotel's golden age, she performed in the music room while their guests dined and danced. The notes she played filled those rooms for years. Now they fill them forever. Staff have arrived to open the music room in the morning and heard piano music before they even unlocked the door, playing softly, a melody that stops when they step inside. On several occasions, multiple witnesses at the same time have watched the piano keys in the Stanley's music room move on their own, not violently, not randomly, intentionally, musically, as if someone invisible is sitting at the keys, playing a song only they remember. Flora Stanley has never stopped performing. And if you're brave enough to stand in that music room alone, in the dark, and simply listen, they say you can still hear her.
The main hotel building isn't the only place the dead gather at the Stanley. The concert hall, a large separate building on the property, has its own permanent residents, and these ones are less welcoming. His name is Paul. Nobody knows his last name. History doesn't record much about him. In life, he was a groundskeeper or a maintenance man, and his job included enforcing the hotel's strict 11 p.m. curfew. He was, by all accounts, serious about it. Paul still is. Late at night, in the concert hall, when the tourists are gone and the staff have headed home, people hear it. A voice, low, close. Get out. Not angry, not screaming, just calm, flat, and unmistakable. Get out. Paranormal investigators have captured this voice on recording equipment. It shows up on EVP sessions, electronic voice phenomenon recordings, across multiple separate visits by different teams. The same phrase, the same tone. Paul is still on duty, and Paul does not like overtime visitors. Then there is Lucy. Her story is sadder and darker. The details are fragmentary, faded by time, as if history itself is reluctant to speak about her. The account goes like this. Lucy was a young woman, a runaway, possibly homeless, who sought shelter in the concert hall without permission. When she was found, she was forced out, into the night, into the cold. She didn't survive. Now guests and investigators report seeing a young woman in the concert hall, curious, watching from a distance, sometimes communicating through the static bursts of spirit boxes, those devices that sweep radio frequencies and can, some believe, be used by spirits to form words. Lucy, if the investigators are right, is playful. She seems to want contact. She asks questions. She responds to them. But underneath the playfulness, there is always the shadow of her story. A girl turned away into the cold. A girl who never found shelter. A girl who never left. If there is one element of the Stanley Hotel that unsettles people more than any other, more than the ghosts in the rooms, more than the piano playing itself, more than the voice telling you to leave, it is the fourth floor. The top floor of the Stanley Hotel is known simply as the children's floor, and what happens there has no good explanation. Guests on the fourth floor and guests on the floors below it report the same thing at all hours of the night: the sound of children running, laughing, playing, the thunderous patter of small feet on the corridors, floors above, back and forth, like it's 2 p.m. on a summer day rather than 3 a.m. in an empty building. Some guests have heard the giggling directly outside their door. They've opened it to find nothing, an empty hall, the sound gone the instant the door opened, as if cut with a knife. Others have felt it. A small hand, the size and pressure of a child's hand, gripping their sleeve while they sleep, or tugging at the hem of a jacket, or resting for just a moment on the back of a neck. When they look, there is no one there. The children of the fourth floor have been documented by dozens of independent witnesses over many decades. They're not the twin girls from the Kubrick film. That was pure fiction. These are real accounts, real witnesses, real fear. Who are they? Nobody knows. Why are they there? Nobody can say. But they are there, and they are playing, and they have been playing in those corridors for longer than anyone alive can remember. Let's be honest about something. Stephen King is a genius, but The Shining is not purely imagination. Every iconic element of that story has a root in the real soil of the Stanley Hotel. The fire hose that chased his son in his nightmare became the central weapon of a possessed hotel. The topiary animals that come to life in the novel, they were inspired by the carefully sculpted hedges on the Stanley's grounds, those same beautiful shapes that look, in the dark, just slightly too much like something that moves. The sense of a hotel as a living, breathing, hungry entity, that came from standing alone in the Stanley's corridors, hearing sounds with no source, feeling eyes in rooms with no people. The ghostly bartender who offers a drink in the gold room, the spectral partygoers dancing to music from the 1920s, the terrible woman in the bathtub who transforms from beautiful to monstrous. All of it rooted in a place that already had its own legends, its own dead. Stephen King didn't conjure the Overlook Hotel out of thin air. He channeled it. He sat in that room on that stormy October night, and the Stanley Hotel, with a century of loss and tragedy and devotion soaked into its walls, reached out and poured itself into him. And what came out was one of the most terrifying books in the history of literature.
Here is where the story gets genuinely strange. After The Shining became a cultural phenomenon, after the novel, after the Kubrick film, after 2 generations of horror fans grew up terrified of Room 237 and the words "Red Rum" and 2 little girls in a hallway, the Stanley Hotel did something unusual. It leaned in. Most real-life locations connected to disturbing events try to distance themselves. They change their names, they bulldoze the buildings, they scrub the history. The Stanley Hotel did the opposite. They embraced everything. Ghost tours run nightly. Paranormal investigation groups can book the hotel specifically to conduct overnight sessions in the most haunted rooms. The hotel plays the Stanley Kubrick film on a dedicated TV channel, 24 hours a day, year-round. They host an annual Shining Ball, a formal event where hundreds of guests dress as characters from the book and film, and dance in the ballrooms where Flora Stanley's ghost still plays piano. And Room 217, the room where it all began, the room where Stephen King had his nightmare, is the most requested room in the hotel. The most requested. People drive hundreds of miles, book months in advance, pay a premium to sleep in the room where Stephen King was terrified. Think about what that says about us. Think about what that says about fear. We are drawn to it. We always have been. The darkness calls, and we answer. So here's where we land. The Overlook Hotel burned to the ground at the end of Stephen King's novel. It was destroyed. It was over. But the Stanley Hotel is still standing. Right now, tonight, somewhere in Estes Park, Colorado, the lights are on in a room at the end of a corridor. And somewhere in the building, in the music room, in the lobby, in the concert hall, on the 4th floor, something is moving. Mrs. Wilson is tidying a room no one is sleeping in. Flora Stanley is playing a song no one requested. F.O. Stanley is standing at the front desk, watching the door. And on the 4th floor, in the hallway outside room 401, a child is laughing. The next time you watch The Shining, and you will, because that movie does something to you that doesn't go away, I want you to remember this. Jack Torrance is not real. The Overlook Hotel is not real. But Room 217 is real. Elizabeth Wilson is real. The piano is real. And the children on the 4th floor, they are absolutely real. The Stanley Hotel is not a theme park. It is not a movie set. It is a building that has stood for over 100 years, collecting its dead, holding them close, refusing to let them go. And if you're brave enough or foolish enough, you can book a room tonight. They'll be expecting you. They've always been expecting you. If you made it to the end of this video, first of all, turn your lights back on. You're welcome. Second, if you've ever stayed at the Stanley Hotel, if you've heard something you can't explain, if room 217 gave you a nightmare, I need to hear about it in the comments. Right now. Don't think about it, just type. And if you want more real-world horror history, the stories behind the stories, the places that created the fear, subscribe.
because we're just getting started. New video drops every week. Sleep tight, if you can.